the panel on privacy, advertising, and trust, can we have it all? I hope that you are all adequately caffeinated and also hydrated, because that's very important. I'm your chair. I'm Raegan MacDonald. I am the head of EU Public Policy at Mozilla, based here in Brussels. I want to say a few words just to frame our debate, and then I will hand it off to our moderator, Jennifer Baker, who will take us into an interactive dialogue. So what is this panel about? Advertising has allowed many websites and internet services that we use every day to thrive without requiring direct payment from users. But at the same time, this approach has led to a severe erosion of trust. This is evidenced both anecdotally through statements like, if you're not paying, then you're the product, and practically through a clear, sharp increase in the use of content blockers. Ad fraud, pervasive tracking, diminishing returns for publishers, all of these issues further separate the publisher from the user. So while advertising as a business model may not be the problem, and in fact, I think if we're honest with ourselves, advertising is probably here to stay, it's difficult to deny that improvements are needed. And in Mozilla's view, and the reason why we have convened this panel, is that the status quo is unsustainable and requires reform. So what kind of reforms would meaningfully advance these solutions? In Brussels, we're often laser focused on legislation. The e-privacy regulation, for instance, that is currently under negotiation, as well as the incoming GDPR, has certainly catalyzed a discussion on the future of advertising and privacy and what that should look like. But today, I would like us to go one level higher and to think about this in the bigger picture. Because regaining trust can also extend beyond the realm of privacy laws, though of course privacy laws are very important in themselves. So industry initiatives, educational efforts, tools, more accountable business practices, and transparency can also contribute meaningfully to solutions. And in order to make any progress on these challenges, we'll need concerted efforts from all sides to forge a path where economic business models, privacy, and trust can all peacefully coexist. So we're very fortunate today to have a panel of experts that come from very different parts of the debate. Some of what I would like us to discuss in this session include identifying the challenges that are undermining trust and what can be done to address them, whether the EU instruments like the e-privacy regulation and the GDPR would advance solutions in this space or complicate it, and to what extent there are promising business models to explore that could complement or even rival advertising. As we only have about an hour, I want to quickly run through the introductions of our panelists. I would encourage you, if you are so inclined, to check out their full bios, which are on the Cpdp website and materials, as well as probably LinkedIn. So I will start alphabetical order. We have Catherine Armitage, who is Senior Manager for Public Affairs at the World Federation of Advertisers. We have Anya Ciesielska, Policy Officer in Cybersecurity and Digital Privacy Unit of DG CNECT. We have Dr. Laura Dornheim, Head of Communications at AO and AdBlock Plus. Mathilde Fiquet, EU Legal Affairs Manager for the Federation of European Direct Marketing Associations, and Estelle Massé, Senior Policy Analyst at Access Now. So I really look forward to a fruitful discussion, and without further ado, I hand it off to you, Jen.
Thank you. Okay, because it's quite a short panel and there's an awful lot of us, we're going to try and have it quite interactive, so there's going to be no opening statements, and the panelists may even ask questions of each other, and we'll just try to have a normal conversation for once. So let me start by asking you all, however, first to the big question, and it's one that Raegan just mentioned, which is, what is undermining trust? If you believe that trust by users is being undermined, first of all, say so or not, and tell me why you think it is. And I'm just going to throw it straight, Anna, let's start with you.
Yes, good afternoon. Well, I think the first thing is the lack of transparency. That's the problem. People, thank you. Like the recent Eurobarometer that the European Commission conducted showed that 90% 2% of individuals would like to give their permission before their data from their phones, smartphones, or computers is accessed or taken. This clearly shows that people would like to have control over their data, and they would like to know what happens also later with their data. So I think the first issue would be to give more transparency to individuals, to raise their awareness, and then to empower them so that they can have effective choices and decide what happens with their data.
Okay, let's kind of already leaping to the solutions. Catherine, what is undermining it? Let's identify the problems first.
So, just to introduce a little bit, the World Federation of Advertisers. So I work for an association that represents sort of the world's biggest global advertisers. So, I don't know, the biggest brands that you can think of who are paying for the advertising that we're seeing online. And I think we're actually reaching a really important moment for digital advertising. I think that GDPR is going to drive a fundamental shift towards better online advertising, which will require greater data transparency in the digital ad ecosystem built on trust. But I think that the reason that this is an important moment is because it's going to require a change. And I think there's two really important elements to that. One is the responsibility of the industry to make ads less annoying online. And the other one is really thinking about the wider digital advertising ecosystem and figuring out how to make that an ecosystem which is built on trust and responsible and ethical data collection all the way along. And maybe I can just say a couple of words about each of those. I think in terms of making ads less annoying, many of you are aware that ad blocking is a huge phenomenon now. I think the figures that I've seen most recently, I think we've got a 30% growth in ad blockers year on year. And I think around 11% of the total internet population currently uses an ad blocker. And so for the advertising industry, this is a huge issue. If people aren't seeing your ads, then what's the point in doing them? And I think so that the industry response to that has been, okay, well, let's find out why people are blocking ads and then respond to that. And so the research that the Coalition for Better Ads, which is a cross-industry initiative which my organisation is part of, along with a number of publishers and other people working in the advertising industry, they did a lot of research, and at the moment, I think about the main reasons that people block ads are apparently security, it's 30%. I'm worried that if you're actually going to click on the wrong thing, you'll download a virus. 29% is around interruption, so just ads popping up and annoying you. 16% slowing down your internet experience. 14% too many ads, and actually, interestingly for this room, only 6% block ads because of privacy concerns. So the industry response to this has been, okay, well, if people are finding these ads annoying, how do we make them less annoying? So we did a huge piece of research, asking thousands and thousands of people to identify which ad formats people find the most annoying. And the result of that has been to identify 18 different ad formats on desktop and mobile, which people say, I hate it when I get pop-ups that I can't minimize. I hate it when I get video that autoplays with sound, things like that. And now we've identified those ad formats, and the whole industry is working on now a way to enforce that globally to not show those types of ads online anymore. This goes across the publishers towards the advertisers. So this is kind of the first step, I think, in terms of making the online advertising experience for people better. I think the other really important thing, which ties a bit more back to privacy, is talking about the supply chain and the ecosystem that revolves around digital advertising. I think that there's been a lot of issues for the industry over the past kind of 1 or 2 years about how untransparent this ecosystem is. I think for every ad served, you can have, every time you see an ad, I think you can have up to about 50 different companies touching your personal data. That's massive. And I think this whole ecosystem, somebody told me the other day, there's at least 2,000 different companies in this ecosystem gathering data, exchanging data, using that data to serve online ads. And what we are telling advertisers is you need to have full visibility and control over this supply chain, which actually really isn't the case today. It's more or less impossible today to trace that entire supply chain from start to finish. So things are going to have to change radically when the GDPR comes into force, because as an advertiser, you need to know what your money is being spent on and whether that data collection happening with all those third parties and suppliers, which you might not have a direct relationship with, you need to make sure that they are also GDPR compliant. If you don't even know who they are, how can you do that? So I think that GDPR is going to make this a fundamental shift, which ultimately we think will be a good thing for people and also a good thing for advertisers.
Okay, I'm going to throw it up the other end. Estelle, is, having less annoying adverts, is that good enough?
Well, that's a start, but I think some of the fundamental issue we have with the current business model and some of the reason why it's not the online world is currently not sustainable is, well, first we have a lack of redress for users. That's one of the issue, also linked to a lack of enforcement of current rules. Also, another reason is the fact that the rules are not necessarily appropriate to the current online environment. But the biggest issue all over the board is that a large number of actors online have completely disregarded privacy and data protection, and they've considered it as an option rather than a fundamental right. So a lot of the current advertisement business model is related also to ad-on tracking. So advertising may have a place on the online world, but it depends on which type of advertising we're talking about.
Okay. Mathilde, do you want to pick up on that? I mean, I know you're quite focused on the questions of consent when it comes to advertising.
Right. I think piling up on what Catherine was saying regarding the lack of trust, I think there's clearly a transparency issue which leads to a lack of understanding from the user's point of view about what's happening. It does not necessarily mean that we have to look at changing completely the business model. There's definitely a need for more transparency. In that case, the GDPR is, in my view, already answering a big part of the question. I mean, one of the main objectives of the GDPR was to bring back transparency and to bring back control over any individual's personal data. So the future of advertising is actually now. The reason we are all here in this room and we're all here in this conference for 3 days is that we're looking at how to implement the GDPR, and that's what raises so many questions. So from an advertising point of view, trust is the most important things you can actually have, and you want to keep it at all costs. And with the GDPR, with the deadline approaching, someone was pointing out this morning that we are exactly 4 months away from the deadline. It really is a buzz where now companies are looking at, okay, how do I provide that kind of transparency? How do I do it? So there's lots of discussion here, and that in effect, we already create a lot of clean sweep over the internet, because publisher will have a much better control over the kind of third parties that interact on their website. They will want to, because they will be legally responsible for this kind of action taking place on their website. So regarding the future of advertising, I think the GDPR in that case is extremely helpful. I see it will definitely address some of the challenges that have eroded trust in the past, and I'm very optimistic that we will find a way to implement it. Pointing out to what you just mentioned, Jen, regarding consent, that's where my fear come back is that the e-privacy regulation that we're also talking a lot during all those panels today and yesterday, in my view, is actually bringing back the problem of the past. What we got with the GDPR is a tool that was meant to be flexible, enabling companies and businesses to be responsible, to actually act and have an incentive to have trust. The problem with consent is actually that from a consumer point of view, it is not scalable to the digital life that we actually live today, and the real consent that the legislator have designed, the fully informed consent, the consent where the user actually know exactly what he's consenting to and has full control, is difficult when you're gonna receive hundreds of those every day when you're online or on your phone. So what I'm saying is that we need to look at different solutions, and that's part of the discussion that we need to have with the advertising industry on this new legislation. So it's really important that we don't necessarily just engage in that approach of consent, which seems to be very difficult to implement from a technical point of view in the future.
Okay, Laura, well, I mean, if consent doesn't work, shall we just block all the ads? I mean, presumably you would like that.
If you ask me, of course, though we, as most of you hopefully know, do not block all ads, because what the coalition is just starting to do, we actually started 5 years ago, talk to users about what they really don't want to see online and what they might be okay. And I agree, there is a big there's a lot of room for compromise. Like I said, we started doing that quite a while ago. And what I want to point out, I want to go back because there's very different research, and I think it always depends on how you design such studies. But all the research that I know shows annoyance with ads as the #1 reason. And I mean, how would you ever trust somebody who constantly annoys you, who constantly tries to trick you, who constantly tries to shove something in your face you really don't want to see? So I do think that is the #1 problem. And the second problem is, I think, I mean, we are all also users, but what the coalition does is a conglomerate of the biggest profiteers of online advertising. There is no user represented. There's studies about users, but you're not talking to and with the users. So AdBlock Plus is used on around 100 million devices worldwide. So we do know quite exactly what users want, what users that don't like most advertising want. So what we did with Acceptable Ads is form a group, form a committee where, of course, industry, advertisers, ad tech is represented, but where we also have experts and user representatives to really bring them all to the table to find this common ground. Because if you look back, advertising was supposed to facilitate a win-win-win situation between a user who wants content from a publisher and an advertiser who somehow funds, supports, helps to monetize that content. But that triangle totally shifted towards the advertising, not really the advertisers actually, but right now the biggest profiteers of online advertising is none of these three, but the big ad tech industry and the two huge platforms that deliver the majority of ads. So we really need to take a step back and maybe not focus on these two huge players when thinking about new guidelines, but talk with the users. That's what we do.
Okay, well, we've still, I mean, part of the aim of this panel was not to get into the weeds of GDPR implementation.
I didn't mention it
No,
once.
you didn't, but some other people did. So I wanted to really actually interrogate whether advertising as the business model for the internet is sustainable and does work. Because you said, trick you into doing something. I mean, isn't fundamentally advertising all about manipulating people and...
Yes.
I put you on the spot there to sort of defend the indefensible, but if you could, that would be great.
Thanks, Jen. Look, advertising is... Look, I work for the World Federation of Advertisers, so I'm not going to stand up here and say I agree with that. However, it's true that advertising is about persuasion. You can call it manipulation, you can call it persuasion. It's about presenting the product in a way that would make somebody more likely to buy it. That's probably, I'm not a marketing expert, but I think that's more or less how advertising started back in the first days of the first print ads and the first TV ads hundreds of years ago. I think today that's still very much the case, and I think in advertising, there's a reason that advertising was one of the first industries actually to start self-regulating a long time ago, and that's because, in its essence, that line between manipulation and persuasion is very, very thin and very subjective, and there are a number of responsible actors with advertising who are not in the business of trying to manipulate, but they want to show their product in the right way. There are also obviously going to be other actors who are prepared to make claims that are not true about their product, who are going to want to show their product in a light which isn't entirely true. And that's why self-regulation actually has always played a part in the content of adverts since the beginning, because it's when all the actors come together, all the advertisers come together and say, okay, there are certain things like if you want to say that your product's the best, you have to have certain evidence to prove that, right? If you want to say that your product will do certain things, you can't just make it up. It has to be based on some kind of evidence. And online, it's the same thing. I think what's really interesting about digital advertising is that as advertising moved onto the internet, when the internet sort of started fairly recently within the history of advertising, it's not just all about the content of an ad anymore, about being able to trust what the ad is saying. It's also really about the other stuff that happens around the ad. So the targeting of the ad and the data that's collected and how it's collected and the permissions that are given for that data to be collected to enable that targeting. And also, as we talked about, the formats of that ad as well. And I think those are the two areas which we really need to be focusing on now, because digital advertising, it's becoming one of the major types of advertising, and we really need to focus on that. But I do think that there is still the future for advertising, for funding many, many different types of content, but we need to make sure we're doing advertising in a responsible way.
Well, you mentioned different types of advertising. So, I mean, let's talk about those other options. I mean, there's contextual advertising, which is basically just dumb. Here's you're reading a car magazine, here's an advert for a car. Why isn't that possible? Why do we need all the trackers in the behavioral advertising? Because isn't that simply just making it easier for us to be manipulated? Users, end users, consumers, people. Who wants to take that?
I cannot answer that completely, but for instance, the Commission funded one project which is called Towards Transparency and Privacy in the Online Advertising Business. And short, it's types. Actually, it was already presented at the Digital Assembly under the Maltese presidency last year. And this project, I invite you to go to your search engine and find it online. There are several tools that exactly aim to increase the transparency and put more, the user put him or her more in control. And what's interesting is that, for instance, there is a tool called Data Broker, and this is a tool that empowers users to, allows users to monetize their personal data while still being able to keep this data private and choosing what to share and what to receive, what targeted ads to receive in exchange. And there are other tools. There is also a privacy test. There's actually a whole bunch of tools that I invite you to check. So this is maybe just one example on something alternative to the current business model.
I'm still waiting for the proof that targeted advertising actually works better. I'm not sure how many of you ever got a flight to Brussels offered and an advert after you just booked the flight to come here. I get advertises for wedding dresses, though I even publicly posted on Facebook that I'm never going to marry. And there's this claim of serving the right ad to the right person at the right time, the right channel. A, I've never really seen that work. B, I doubt that this would make it easier to sell a product. So, but what I do see are the downsides of this massive data collection that then can be used to actually manipulate election results. To what degree we still don't really know, but we know that is possible right now. So I do not see the benefit for the advertising industry. I do see a huge risk for society. So if I just take that into consideration, I would totally agree. Let's just cut all the tracking. And I mean, there are some, a lot of big brands go back to brand campaigns where it's less about targeting, but about maybe even really nicely done and cool campaigns. So that would be a suggestion.
Estelle, and then I'll come back to Mathilde, because I'm sure you'll want to respond.
There is the question whether tracking advertisement based on tracking function, but there is also the question whether it's even lawful right now. There is the issue that users don't like certain ads because they're very loud, etc., but the tracking advertising is very intrusive, and transparency won't solve it all. It's not fine by just telling us like, oh, I'm reading your email, by the way, so then I can give you an ad on a flight that you just booked. It's okay, it's transparent, but it's not respecting my rights. So transparency is not the only solution to that. And I think a whole underlying issue in the whole debate we're having for a few years on the advertisement and privacy is just that we're hearing a lot of time, well, that this type of advertising has allowed for innovation and for certain platforms to continue to exist, but this is very problematic if we're thinking that innovation is only possible in a way that it intrudes into people's personal life, and it violates their fundamental right. Innovation should be possible in a way that respects people's privacy. So having a whole idea behind the fact, like, well, let's people become their own data broker and monetize their personal data is extremely worrying, in particular when you know that data brokers are some of the shadiest business that exist here. And just telling people, like, go away and sell your data so then you can be tracked and profiled, it's probably not giving them a full and accurate picture of what that means in reality.
Right. I want to come back to the comparison you made between targeted advertising and contextual advertising. I think there is much more. It's a much broader industry than to limit it to just those two approaches. I think what advertiser wants, what the marketing industry is about engaging with people and trying to build a one-on-one relationship. I work with many of my members who are trying to create a dialogue and use actually data which have been actively provided by users in completely different contexts than just tracking and collection without people's knowledge online. I mean, there are a lot of different situations where this kind of collection can take place, and in different legal environments as well. So I think that contextual is not necessarily the only option. There are different approaches which also trigger reflection from a marketer point of view about how to use more privacy-friendly tool, how to actually provide more transparency, how to provide more control. So we're looking at a lot of different approaches. Well, I want also to tilt the balance and look back at one point, which is the overall business model. Ultimately, at the moment, most of the internet is funded by advertising, and I don't think that we should look at a all or nothing situation. I think that from the user's point of view, privacy is important. I will not deny that, and there is a lot of shady situation that needs to be cleared out, and I think the digital environment that is about to come into place will help tremendously in that regard. But I think we should not overlook the benefits that advertising brings to the business model in terms of offering the ability for everyone to access content without having to pay money. And I've said money here, and not coming back to the sentence that was mentioned earlier. So it is definitely an added value for society. So we need to look at a situation where we could grab the best of the two models. And I'm not sure contextual at the moment is the right solution. I think we need to look at it, because I understand when you say you've never found an ad that you found useful. First of all, we tend to notice only the one that are shady or we have a problem with. When you don't notice it, that means everything's going well. The second is that publishers do have an interest in using targeted ads simply because they make a lot more money out of an ad. It's from 5 to 10 times more than just a contextual ad. That means that there is a business model behind it. And the more money publishers make, the more services they are able to provide to you. I found this morning on LinkedIn someone who had posted an error page from the FT. And I thought that was extremely interesting, because that error page from the FT was not filled with just a single 404, you have an error and here's a blank page. It actually showed a lot of reasons why the page could not be found. And one of them was, you did not agree to fund it sufficiently, or not enough people fund it sufficiently, so it just can't appear. And that's what it is. The content of the internet needs to be financed one way or the other. And I agree again, we need to find a way for people to control their privacy. Privacy is a fundamental right. I will never go against that statement. I just want to make sure that the legal frameworks that will come in the future find a right balance and do not necessarily put a default position that will lead to a situation where only the richest, only the wealthiest will have access to information, because I think it's also something important that needs to be taken into consideration.
Okay, well, obviously, freedom of information. I'm a journalist. I've a lot of feelings on that. One of my feelings is that perhaps advertising was never really compatible with ethical and independent journalism, because editors get put under pressure. It happens. I mean, no one's going to stand up and say in a reputable publication,
yeah, the sales team lean on our editors and on our reporters, but I will tell you, it absolutely does happen. So the question then I have is, if we accept, okay, advertising's not going away, are there certain categories of places where we don't want, in particular behaviourally motivated advertising to exist? So where I'm saying, so maybe on a news website, you don't want the category of political advertising. I mean, it's different if you're trying to sell me a chocolate bar, but maybe I don't want, you know, we talked, you mentioned, Laura, about possible stealing the election in the US. Can somebody talk to me about where you think lines might be drawn in terms of categories of advertising and in terms of places we see the advertising?
Well, I think that a lot of this comes down to giving people the choice and the control, right? So, yeah, I totally accept that there are people who don't want to see personalized advertising and they don't want to share their data to receive personalized advertising. And those people should have the right to say no. They do have the right to say no. But equally, there are some people who would prefer to see personalized ads, relevant ads, and are willing to share some data about themselves in order to receive ads that are more relevant. And they should also have the choice to say yes. But in order for that to work as well, they also need to have the control over what data is shared and what's not shared, and also the understanding of when and where that's being shared. So I think for me that's more important than talking about places you don't want to see ads or categories of ads that you don't want to see. And actually, yeah, if we could get to a world where, yeah, you can actually have that element of granular control around, you know, I don't want to see alcohol ads because I don't drink or I don't participate in that type of activity, or I don't want to see ads, political ads. And I think actually there's some interesting experiments going on around those kind of areas, but it requires a real focus on this idea of choice and control, which interestingly the GDPR I think really encourages and creates an interesting space for that. So I would like to see, potentially over the next few years, a lot more discussion about this as a possibility, and I think a lot of the industry could benefit from that as well.
But I think what you do is just like shift massive responsibility to users, which mostly don't have time nor resources nor education to do that. I mean, nobody really knows like what happens if I go on my regular news site and I click on an article about mental health. Like, to which profile might that ever be added? Which advertiser, which of the up to 70 parties, as I'm aware of right now, leaks that data somewhere? I think that's, it's very easy for the advertising and ad tech industry to say like, well, we should just make it transparent for users. But transparency by itself is not a value. If it's such a massive and complex information that you have to detangle and you're mostly not even able, and beyond time, then that's just a illusion that is really a step forward. It's just shifting away and shipping off responsibility from my perspective.
But I think that is really very much in line actually with what I was saying earlier. Like, I think in the current setup, we are working within an ecosystem which has a lot of intermediaries in it, and actually after GDPR, I think more advertisers need to be thinking much more carefully about the number of partners that are in that supply chain. And if that supply chain ultimately changes, it will make this type of thing easier. So it works well for the people and it works well for the advertisers. So I think, yeah, I would probably agree that today the initiatives focusing on that would find that very difficult. And even after GDPR, I think it's going to be hard. But it requires a real collaboration between regulators, across the different parts of the advertising industry. So yeah, the advertisers that I work with, the ad tech industry, also the publishers is really important, but also with people, like you've said this before, with users themselves, get people's thoughts and input on, okay, what would I find easy to understand? What kind of information do I want? When is that too much information? And that's the type of project that we need to be looking at in the future.
Okay, I want to ask a question of the audience, so a show of hands, just to challenge what you said, because I have my ideas, and of course we all live in a filter bubble, but how many people here want targeted ads, would prefer to have targeted ads? You want to have targeted ads? Hands up if you want them.
can I just make the point that we're at a privacy conference?
I'm aware of that, yes. I mean, there is, but that's a remarkably few number of hands in the room. So just to challenge a bit this idea that people prefer to have them. I don't want to have them. I don't want to spend money. I don't have it to spend. I don't want to be told this dress is gorgeous, buy it. I'd rather see an advertisement for a lawnmower because I live in a flat. Estelle, let me ask you about other models, because there are other business models. Do you see a future where something else might work?
Yeah, and I think we're starting to see it. I think many of you have seen that in reaction to people increasing ad blockers, there is a lot of discussion on what to do and how to continue. There is a lot of discussion among the publisher on how to continue to survive with that business model. So it's true that there is an issue within the publishing world on how to finance the work of journalists, but the choice with this advertisement is very difficult, as you mentioned actually before, Jennifer. It also creates a lot of journalistic issue on what being able to write about and not being able to write. But there is also the issue that in order to have people access to your newspaper, you might have to sell information about them or have them do this kind of trade-off, and they're poorly informed, because often the notice that you put is just like, well, if you want to access this for free, you need to do this, but there is no clear information of what it means in practice. So I think we're starting to see a discussion on what possible business model to continue with, but more than anything, there is a realization that the current system is unsustainable. And perhaps one of the interesting development is the one from Facebook, more related to the US debate on fake news and how certain ads were linked to that, which have announced a change in their newsfeed. But there is already interesting article saying that what it will mean in practice is that the ads on Facebook will become more expensive, because the number of ads will be reduced and the number of people accessing this ad will be reduced, which in the end increase the revenue for Facebook, but does not solve the issue for people who want to advertise their product, and also does not solve the issue for users. So there is, I think, a realization that the current system is not sustainable, but we're not getting to a solution that is appropriate for users, and neither one for the advertiser, but just the person in between.
Okay, just to let you know, if you were interested in that data broker tool that Anna mentioned, I've retweeted the link to it, so you can all follow me on Twitter.
It's one of the tools,
yeah.
there are more.
Yeah, okay. Now, we questions from the audience. I saw Pat's hand. See, Alec, oh gosh, oh good Lord, okay. Oh, we have a mic. Do we have a microphone in the room? Okay, down here at the back on the right, because his hand went up first. My right. And keep the questions brief. I will cut you off if there isn't an actual question mark. We don't need life stories.
Right, I dare not cross you.
And can you stand up, Pat? People can't see.
Sorry, Pat Walsh, Privacy Matters. So, really great to see an all-female panel. And I want to ask a question about
we were hoping no one would mention it, because we are aiming for a world where it is unremarkable.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But it is remarkable, nonetheless. So I have a question on the privacy tools and the choices. Many of the panelists have talked about giving people privacy tools and choices. So here's a question. And this is a real-life scenario. I reviewed an app where it applies to kids 13 plus. I had to agree to privacy policy, cookie policy, and terms and conditions. Inside those terms and conditions, I had to agree to the use of 212 advertising networks and analytics companies, and part of that agreement was to have to go to those companies, read their privacy policies, and use their opt-out tools. The total amount of words, beyond the 3,805 of the privacy policy, I'm not much of a geek, I read them, was 407,000 words. Right. Please tell me what kind of privacy tool and choices you're going to give me for that scenario, because this is real life right now. Thank you.
Okay, is that, I suppose that was directed. Mathilde, do you want to answer?
Right. I think that's exactly the kind of example that we're looking at right now, with the problem of transparency and providing greater control to user. So we do need to develop tool, and there is a lot of discussions on how to provide a centralized solution to users so they can have a better access. But we're always, even when we talk to data protection authorities or to regulators or to other different stakeholders and partners from the civil society, we always have that tilt between providing all the information you want to know. You want to have the ability to know exactly what's happening with your data, whether I'm using it purely for advertising or whether I'm a dodgy organization that is also going to use it for political reasons. I mean, this is clearly something that I wouldn't like to happen, but that I have to provide. So I have to provide a whole lot of information, and you have the right as a user to know them. They have to be written somewhere. And at the same time, we need to find a way that is easy for everyone to express their choice, whether it's to agree or to opt out or withdraw consent or have some degree of flexibility for certain purposes, not other purposes. There's a lot of different options that we can look at that will, in order to make a balanced system. So there are centralized opt-out mechanism for digital advertising, and we're looking and do not trust system is another one. There are different tools, but we haven't pinpoint yet the exact way and the perfect way for the user to have both at the same time. But this is definitely something that is an ongoing discussion.
Okay, I saw some more hands. Yes, so there's a lady down here at the back and then another one here, and I see you guys in the front, but we'll try and not have the same old usual suspects all the time.
Hi, Ciesielska from Tilburg Institute of Law, Technology and Society. I've seen two premises to all the reasoning that has been done, and one is that there is a mismatch of interests between the users, the targets of the advertising, the provider of content online, and obviously the data brokers. And the other one is that the system, the entire online content system, would not survive without. And it appears not to be true. The Digital Content Next, which is the biggest sort of trade association for content providers online, is campaigning hard to show how the advertising system is strangling, actually, all the digital media content, digital content providers, including the big ones like the New York Times. So my question for you is, do you think that we actually, as users and targets, have the same interests of the media and the content providers? Because you were also saying we need to work, I think you were saying that, we need to combine them. Do you think maybe they are already
combined? That could be a better starting point.
Well, let's take that question. I'll ask for yes or no answers. Do you think end users have the same interests as content providers? I'd say no, possibly. Yes, no. It's a tough one.
Well, I'd say users and content providers are way closer than users and advertisers slash ad tech, that's for sure. They want to have a one-on-one relationship. And I do absolutely agree with you. I do not see advertising as fundamentally necessary to have great content online. I mean, we've seen it in a lot of other industries that it is possible to educate people that it's necessary to pay. And we can have a balance of freely accessible content for all, which is super important, especially in democratic systems, and still have the ones that can afford it pay their share. So I definitely think we didn't go into that, we need more and more diverse and more innovative business models than just going crazier and crazier with advertising. Just pay for what you use if you can.
That's great.
It's
okay.
so revolutionary.
Where's our microphone? Okay, I see Katja, and then I'll take a few, okay? I'll take a round, so keep the questions quite brief. Yeah.
Thank you. Katarzyna Szymilewicz, Panoptykon. Actually, I wanted to follow up on the same topic. Do you believe, the rest of you who didn't comment on the previous question, that trust-based advertising is possible at all? Yes, no answers would be appreciated. And then following from that, we all know your online choices or my online choices, the website provided right now by AAB and partners. Do you believe that that tool or similar tool could actually be an efficient way of collecting consents under the new regime that is coming up, could that tool be effective, or there is an inherent problem in structuring consents to third parties in one place? Would it be always a problem with what Pat was saying, too much information or too little information, or can we imagine effective centralized tool for the whole industry collecting third-party consents as the answer? Okay, we get the microphone down front. I'll take 2 questions and then we'll do a round of answers.
Thanks. Nicholas Martin from Fraunhofer Easy in Karlsruhe. So a badly targeted or badly put together set of advertisements seems to at times extract a huge reputational price on brands. But intrusive ads, making use of intrusive tracking technologies, or annoying ads at present does not seem, in my perception, to extract any comparable reputational price on brands. My questions are, why is that? Can that be changed? And would that be maybe a strategy for dealing with this problem by changing the incentives of the major players in the advertising universe? Thank you.
Alexander Hunt, Think Privacy. I have a really simple question. We all know that lobbying around new laws in Brussels is dominated by ad tech industries and technology industries, as well as industry groups such as the IAB and World Federation of Advertisers. You lose at the lobbying frequently. You lost in 2009 with Article 5.3 of the e-privacy directive. You lost with GDPR. You're currently losing with the e-privacy regulation. So my question is very simple. When will the advertising industry actually start to obey the law, as opposed to constantly breaking it, which they do now?
I should have said no rhetorical questions either. Okay, well, we've got a few questions here, so just ladies, say which ones you want to answer. So, first question was from Katja. Do you believe that a trust-based advertising model is actually possible? And you wanted yes or no answers? Yes, of course it is. Catherine?
So, and I think the last 2 questions I'm going to take first as combined ones, because it's about, you're kind of asking the question of like, when will it be really damaging for a brand's reputation to be found to be tracking or invading people's privacy? Honestly, the answer is, from WFA members' perspective, is GDPR, right? So GDPR, you have all of industries talks about the fines, 4% fines, huge. Some of the members that we work with, 4% of their annual turnover is billions and billions. However, we did a survey of advertisers in our membership, and we said, what's the biggest risk to you of GDPR? And actually, the top answer was damage to our reputation and losing the trust of consumers. Because actually, this kind of combines a few of the questions. What I found really interesting working at the World Federation of Advertisers, I joined about a year ago, is that actually for advertisers, for big brands are built on trust, actually. The reason that brands exist and make money is because people buy the branded version because they trust that version will deliver certain product benefits rather than something they don't know. So brands are all based around trust, and actually they make money out of building that trust. So actually, from an advertiser's perspective, there's an economic value in actually having trust with the consumer of your product. And losing that trust is such a huge risk. Even bigger than money, really, because fine money can be found if necessary and replaced. But if you lose trust in the brand because of a dodgy ad, an ad that you feel uncomfortable with, because there's a front page of a newspaper that says that you're funding, that you're not respecting people's privacy, which might happen after GDPR. That's a really, really big issue for the big brands that we work with at WFA. So actually, I think I think it's a really important thing to think about, because we're not just saying this in a kind of, you have to believe us that we just want to be lovely, and we just believe in trust, just like that.
We just want to sell stuff.
there's an economic benefit for building trust with people and not undermining that trust by collecting their data against their will. And that's really important. And GDPR, I think, is going to actually really accelerate that and make that even more important.
Well, let me build, before we come to these questions, on that issue of reputational damage. And I want to ask, does the average end user who isn't at Cpdp actually know where the blame lies? Because I suspect that a lot of people who say, oh, that's a creepy advert that I've been given, actually think it's the platform's fault. It's, it's Google has given me, they don't actually think that it's the advertiser behind it, because they don't think that, they think this in terms of platforms, or it's the browser, or it's something else. Raegan, do you think that possibly end users blame the wrong people?
Yeah, I think understanding the ad tech lumascape is incredibly complex. And especially, on this panel and in Brussels, we sometimes forget how expert and far into this bubble that we are. So I think from the user's point of view, all they really care about is having a good experience. They don't want to have, their load pages time from a perspective of a browser, their load pages to be delayed. They don't want their data to be eaten up by 50 ads or trackers that are following them. And they don't want that creepy element. Sometimes users don't necessarily identify it as privacy or data protection, but it's like a creepy aspect. Like, they don't want to have something that they searched on one device and have them advertising to them on another, and this kind of thing that just follows you around the web and through all of your devices. So I think that's really important, and from our point of view, we try to give the users the choice to turn off those ads to protect their privacy, exactly because, not only because of reputation, but we have this mission. But I think that is definitely something that platforms, advertisers are all pretty painfully becoming aware of, that this reputation does play a role, and that everyone is kind of blamed. So if everyone could make it better, then it would be better for them and for the advertisers and for the platforms.
Okay, these other questions we had. One was, is a single centralized consent tool possible, and would it work? I think that was the question. Who wants to handle that?
Right, well, I'm also going to answer to the other question. First of all, yes, I do think there can be a trusted relationship between users and brands and advertisers they have trust with. Regarding a centralized way to provide consent, there's certainly a lot of discussions ongoing throughout the industries and through all the different organizations. So this is something that obviously we're all looking at in that whole process of finding a way to implement the legislation. I want to clarify one point. I don't work for IEB. I work for FEDMA, for people who arrive a little bit later. And I think, I do believe there is definitely added value in having a constructive dialogue with the regulator and the legislator. And the best example that I have in my pocket is the FEDMA Code of Conduct on the processing of personal data. It's a tool that applies to all our members and that we developed together with the Article 20 Working Party, which means that at the moment, the way we understand the old legislation, we're in the process of reviewing it, but the way we interpret the old legislation for the direct marketing industry is something that has been approved and discussed for over 5 years with all the regulators in Europe. And that's where the added value of having a partners in Brussels is. And I think that helps my industry, not just the digital advertising, but the entire direct marketing industry, to go in the right direction and to actually be compliant and provide trust in the end.
Okay, we had more questions. So here, and then, yeah.
Thank you. Claudio Agosti, Google, in the 15th of February, will roll out in Chrome a native ad blocker. How do you interpret this move?
Sorry, I didn't hear. What was the question?
How do you interpret this move?
Oh,
I have an interpretation. Or do you want to collect further questions first?
Yeah, Lucas, you had a question, I think, here at the front. No. Yeah, lady has had her hand up many times, yes.
Hi, my name is Andrea Lisiewicz. I'm an attorney. I work with a lot of clients in the advertising industry, and I wanted to ask you how you see the situation of publishers mainly, because obviously online content cannot be free. they need to live out of something. So most of you were saying that the current business model is not sustainable, so it shouldn't be financed from advertising. Okay, it should be paid. But obviously, a lot of users don't want to pay for content. So there will be something when you enter a website asking you whether you consent to give your data for advertising so that the web publisher gains money from advertising, or if not, you are asked to pay for the content. Now, the problem that I see is that under GDPR, this would not be a valid consent either way, because one of the conditions for consent is that you need to have a real choice and you need to not suffer negative consequences when you refuse. So how do you see the future of not only advertising, but the life of web publishers and content online? Because to me, especially listening to you today, it seems like we really don't have any solution at all. And to me, that's unacceptable as working in practice with this. Thank you.
Okay, any more questions in this round? Yeah, it's here.
Hello, Danny Guanin from Bremer Datum. Laura, you mentioned that you have a board, and that remembers me to the panel of civil engagement yesterday, so I want to ask if you can maybe elaborate the function of the board, and maybe the other advertiser representatives, if you also see civil engagement from advertisers with civil society, or if you see a way forward in this tool.
Okay, I'll let you answer that one straight away since it's so specific.
Yeah, actually, I have something to say about all three of them, but I try to keep it short. So about Chrome, I think first of all, it's really problematic if the biggest player in online advertising starts to decide which advertising to show in their browser or not, because which might that be? So we made an analysis. Chrome will block 16% of all, or like a huge list of ad formats, while AdBlock Plus and a lot of other ad blockers block 93% of ads. So just to give you an idea, it's not actually an ad blocker, it's more like an ad skimmer or something like that. So we're not too worried that the installations will go down. Then, because that's a close topic, how, like the 7% that we let through, how do we come to that criteria? We started talking to users when we first thought about facilitating a compromise between publishers and users, because we didn't want to kill content providers by providing an ad blocker. And last year we actually handed that over to an independent committee, the Acceptable Ads Committee, which is that committee I mentioned before, which tries to bring to the same table the ad tech industry, advertisers, publishers, experts, and users. Very important. They're sitting there. They have the same rights and votes. And they will continue to develop these criteria because, of course, the internet develops, mobile develops, so we need to adapt what can be an acceptable ads for most users, most ad-blocking users. So to your question now, I do see that there is this area where you can compromise, where you can have decent, okay advertising that really facilitates this like triple win that I tried to describe before, that helps the users, the publishers, and the brand. But like I also mentioned, I think we need other options. And so far, most of the publishing, of the content providing industry has been so focused on, well, ads work for hundreds of years, they have to work online too. We just have to make them bigger, louder, more annoying, more interactive. No, I think we need to rethink. And for years, the publishing industry has been complained that they have declining revenues, but they never came up with innovative solutions. They transferred maybe their subscription models that they have in print online, which just doesn't work. Nobody pays 60 euros a month for a subscription for a digital news magazine. What we actually started is a browser add-on called Flatter that you can install that allows you to set a budget a month, maybe $10, because that's what most of us pay for Spotify or Netflix, and that will then be distributed through all the content providers that you consume in a given month. So that's just one take, and there are others out there, like Blendle, who tries to facilitate an easy direct payment solution. I think what we've seen in the video and music industry is if we make it easy for people to pay for content, they will do so.
Okay, well, I mean, there are other models in response to that question. I mean, there is, website owners and publishers can set their, can use their unused computing power or they're, to mine for cryptocurrencies. I mean, there are other models other than advertising.
Yeah, be innovative.
Why not? It doesn't, and that's not privacy invasive. Possibly, probably is. Catherine, did you want to tackle this question of the Chrome?
So the question on the Chrome standards, so Google Chrome, the project that I was talking about before, the Coalition for Better Ads, which WFA is part of, as I explained, we worked with many thousands of users to survey which ad formats were the most annoying. We came up with this list of ad formats that we, as a coalition, we're moving towards not using those formats anymore. So advertisers committing not to create ads in those kind of formats, publishers committing not to sell slots that fill those ad formats to advertisers. And we as a coalition are in discussions around how to enforce that on a global level. And Google, who is also involved in the Coalition for Better Ads, has announced that as of February the 15th, they are going to enforce those standards on Google Chrome. So as of, if I understand correctly, as of 15th of February, you're not going to see ads within those types of formats. Maybe it doesn't go as far as AdBlock Plus, but it's still going to mean that ultimately people will see less annoying ads, right? So it's the start, but actually I think what we would like to see as a global coalition is a focus on how to roll that out more widely across different types of browsers in different regions, and have actually an enforcement mechanism, which means that publishers also will have the right to challenge, okay, well actually we think that this ad doesn't fall into the categories of formats that we've said that we were going to get rid of, and have some kind of process where there can be discussion about that as well that works for everybody within the ecosystem. So that's an ongoing process.
Has anybody else got any innovative funding models that don't lie?
I just wanted to thank you for your question, because I think you've been highlighting very well the problem we were facing. I'm fully supportive of the publishers trying to find alternative and different business model. What I see right now is that the legal framework that the e-privacy is creating for us in the near future is likely to prevent us from doing that by putting us into this very narrow consent problem. And I was I was doing a presentation in Ghent University a few months ago, in a room with a lot of academics, and there's one thing we agreed on, is that consent is not a workable solution online. But what we also agreed on, maybe a little bit less, is that we don't know what alternative to put forward. We have, and they were top-notch academic working on that issue for a very long time, the same way I'm sure you are, and we all agreed on, like, we don't know what's the solution to provide effective control, but we all agree consent is not one. And we need to find that flexible environment which will enable the development of all those different business models.
Estelle?
I think if we reduce the issue and the future of freedom of press to advertisement, we have a much bigger problem than what we're discussing here. And we're stuck in that problem because when we start saying like, okay, so publisher needs money, so what type of ad should they have, or what is the limit amount of ad, or what content of ad, or what do we like? We're still stuck of ad is the response, but that's probably not where the response is. But until we move on and being like, okay, this advertisement market is not sustainable, it has not been lawful in its entirety. And I'm sorry that now privacy laws are catching up and we're discovering like, okay, this business model is not lawful, and the role of the law is not to adapt to it and make it lawful. We have to make this business model comply with the law. And so if that means that we have to move away from advertisement in certain cases, then it remains an issue for publishers, but maybe then we can have the real discussion that, okay, we need to move away from ad, and what's the solution? And there are models on the internet that show that people will pay for certain types of content under certain formats. So if we're just stuck at saying like, okay, then the issue is just different type of ad or less intrusive ad, it's still the issue of like, well, it's not going to be lawful, so it's still not going to be sustainable.
And as a journalist, obviously, I think journalism should be paid out of direct taxation. Why not, if we believe it's beneficial for society? So I'm going to take, I was going to take 2 last questions and 5 hands have gone up. We have to end this in 10 minutes. So Lucas, we'll have you, Lucy, and then the person at the very back, whom I can't even see, all I can see is a hand.
I don't think you pointed at me, but I have the mic now.
Yep.
Sorry. So Mathilde, you were saying before that actually sort of the cross-device advertising is making 5 to 10% more revenue.
5 to 10 times.
10 times, sorry. And I think no one will be surprised that the more information advertisers have, the more money you will make. So I was wondering, are direct marketers, will we're making more money always be a valid argument to collecting more data? Or are there red lines anywhere in that spectrum?
Okay, let's have answers to that question then while we get the microphone down to the back.
Keep the microphone 1 second, because I'm not sure I understood what your question is.
I could rephrase. I understand that the more information I give to an advertiser, the more money they'll be able to make off of me. I wonder, how long is that a valid argument, making more money? Or is there a point where you say, actually, collecting this quantity of data or this type of data is something we don't want to get into, even if it will make us more money?
Are you asking whether advertisers will self-regulate, essentially? That's what you're asking, isn't it?
You said something about rhetorical questions, sorry.
Well, we do, actually. we do self-regulate. I think it's a Sorry? I think, well, first of all, one of the big points has been regularly mentioned here today is that ultimately the money goes also back to the publisher, because they're the one paid for displaying the ad. I think there's also a work to be done, and that's part of the ongoing work that we are doing also at FEDMA with the review of our code of conduct to look at the principle of proportionality and the different purpose for which you can use the type of data, and also how much data, as you were saying. There is definitely a strong interest to go back to our first point where we started our conversation about trust. So there are some work into that. So I don't think our argument is get as much data as possible for the sake of making as much money as possible. I mean, we obviously want to sell. That's exactly what was being said a little bit earlier. The objective is that we want to advertise products and be able to offer you services and products that are interested, that you want to buy. So that's the overall marketing, the economy that we are in the moment. But there are definitely a strong element of being responsible in order to build that long-lasting, trusted relationship that we want to develop. So I wouldn't see the problem this way. I will not deny the fact that yes, money is definitely the objective of any businesses. But the long-term trust, as Catherine was mentioning it earlier, is definitely something that we want to keep, and privacy is definitely nowadays an important component to take in it.
Okay. Yep. And then we'll have
I just wanted to add to what Mathilde said. I think that for too long in marketing there has been this obsession with marketers to gather as much data as possible, just scoop up as much data as possible, because we think that data is going to be the key to successful advertising, successful marketing. And actually the result of that has been that a lot of marketers a lot of companies are sitting on a lot of data that actually has no value at all, because it's just been hoovered up with not much thought, and actually is completely useless to them in terms of identifying people who actually are really interested in the brand and might want to buy the product. And therefore, I think that GDPR might signal the end of this kind of data free-for-all and focus marketers more on, okay, what data do you want to gather and why? Because you need to be explaining that to be compliant with GDPR. And then also, when you've got to focus on then persuading someone to give you that data because there's something in it for them. Otherwise, obviously, they have the right to say no. then that's also going to really, really focus marketing onto something very, very different that's a lot more based on people opting in and saying, hey, I want to give you my data because I think that I actually trust your brand and I want to see advertising for your brand. And that's going to be a very, very different conversation from what we have today.
Okay, gentleman at the back.
Hello, my name is Rainer. I'm with the Computer Professionals for Peace and Social Responsibility. And with my computer, I do online banking. So when I ask the publishers I usually read, do you know where those 200 ads and tracking cookies are, where they come from? Like what kind of condition the servers are they up to date and everything? They say we have no idea, it's just all outsourced everywhere. So for me, using AdBlocker is just protecting my computer. So are there like ideas how to tackle this? I mean, to make me remove the AdBlocker would mean a lot of trust into the infrastructure of the advertisement industry, which I currently don't have in this aspect. So what's your comment on this?
Okay, do we want to wean people off ad blockers? What might make them do that once? If you've gone to the trouble of downloading it, I don't know what's going to change your mind. Anyone?
Like you said, numbers are still growing, so.
Okay.
I can just repeat what I did mention earlier at the beginning of that panel is that the discussion that we have currently in the industry is also that, and also with publisher, is that the implementation of the GDPR is slowly leading towards a situation where there will be a reduction of number of unauthorized third parties that operates on publishers, because exactly what you said, publisher want to know who operates. It's a matter of trust and confidence in the relationship. So I think that the legislative framework will help going in that direction.
Okay, I'm seeing people queuing up at the door. I was going to try and squeeze in a couple more questions. I'm very sorry. I know many of you had probably really good points to make. But I'm going to let Raegan wrap up as the chair. We haven't solved the issue, and we haven't answered the question. So you do that, please.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Thanks, Jen. You're so great. I think this was really productive. Obviously, we can't solve this issue in a 1-hour panel at a conference, but I think these types of discussions.
It'll be 2 hours.
Yeah, maybe 3. But I think it's healthy for us to have these types of discussions where we can kind of like fight and be open about these different issues. And there are a lot of ongoing initiatives. There's the coalition, which will change, a low-hanging fruit on the types of ads. The GDPR will change the entire ecosystem. There's the e-privacy regulation, which we still are figuring out what that will look like. And there are, always challenges in terms of how to really put the user in control in terms of consent and choice and transparency, and what is that balance, I guess, between advertising and other business models and the user and platforms and the companies. So it's an ongoing challenge, but I think it's good to always have healthy dialogue and debate. And I really want to thank all of you for your great questions, and really sincerely thank this panel and the moderator for such a great discussion. Thank you.